I'm going to show you how you can deploy Windows 11 using Microsoft Deployment Toolkit and Windows Deployment Services. So to start, I've got a clean install of Windows Server 2022 and it's connected to my Active Directory domain. The first thing I want to do is install the Windows Deployment Services feature. So to do that, we can go to Manage in Server Manager, Add Roles and Features. Next, select Role-Based or Feature-Based Installation. Select the server, and then scroll down to the bottom, and then select Windows Deployment Services, Add Features, and then you just next through the rest of the wizard, making sure both Transport Server and Deployment Server are selected. Then press Next, and then Install. While that is installing, we can download Microsoft Deployment Toolkit and the various ADKs. So if you open a web browser and search for Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, and then go to the Download Microsoft Deployment Toolkit link on the official Microsoft website, and then download the MDT version, that is 8456, by just pressing Download, selecting the 64-bit MSI, and then Next, and then it will automatically download. And then if you search for Windows ADK download, I go to the Download and Install Windows ADK. And then here, if you scroll down under the ADK for Windows 11 version 22H2, select Download the Windows ADK. And then we also need the Windows PE add-on, but don't download this version because this version does not include the 32-bit, which Microsoft Deployment Toolkit requires. So if you scroll down further down the page and find the version which is the ADK for Windows 10 version 2004, and then select the Windows PE add-on for the ADK version 2004 and download that one. Now we can see that our installation has succeeded, so we can just close that, go to Tools, and then open up Windows Deployment Services, and then we can expand servers, and then here we've got our deployment server. If we right click it, we can go to Configure Server, and then press Next, select Integrated with an Active Directory domain, as this server is on our Active Directory domain, and then press Next. Here we can specify where we want to store our boot images. By default it selects C Remote Install. You can change that if you want. You can have it on the C, or if you have a separate drive, you can use that. I'm just going to use the C drive. It will give a warning to say for best performance, have it on a separate drive, but to have it on the C drive is perfectly fine. So just press Yes. Here we can select what clients we want the server to respond to. So I'm going to select Respond to all client computers, and then press Next. Now our Windows Deployment Server is configured. I'm just going to untick Add Images to the server, because we will do that later, and then press Finish. And now that's all we need to do for the time being on Windows Deployment Services. So now if we go to our downloads and get the files we downloaded before, we should have our Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, our ADK setup, and our ADK WinPE setup. The first thing we'll want to install is the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, and we can do that by just double clicking it, and then doing Next through the wizard, accept the license agreement and press Next. Leave all this as default, press Next. Leave don't want to join the program at this time for the customer experience, press Next, and then Install. And then press Finish. The next thing we'll want to do is install the ADK setup and then the WinPE setup by just pressing Next for all the wizards. I've already got them pre-downloaded, so I'll just run the installer. And then we can just leave all this as default. Select No for the privacy. And then press Next. And then Accept. Leave all this as default and then press Install. Now that the ADK is installed, we can go back and install the WinPE add-on by just going through and selecting all the defaults. So Next, Next, Accept, and then Install. Now that that's installed, we can close the wizard. And then what we can do is go to Start and search for Deployment Workbench, and then open that. And here is where we can do the rest of our configuration. So the first thing we'll need to do in the Deployment Workbench is create a deployment share. And you can do that by right-clicking the deployment shares and do a new deployment share. Here you can specify the path. Again, you can put it on a separate drive or just leave it on the C drive, which I'm going to do, and then press next. I'm going to leave the share name as default and then press next. Leave the description as default and press next. Here I'm just going to leave all this as we will change this later and then press next. Then next. And now the deployment share is being created. And now we can press finish. Now we've got our deployment share. If we expand it, we can see we've got some folders. We've got our applications where we will store our applications, operating system folder where we will store the operating systems, drivers for storing drivers, packages for storing packages, and then our task sequences for storing task sequences. So the first thing we want to do is import an operating system. So I have got my Windows 11 22H2 that I want to import. And the easiest way to do this is copying the ISO file to your deployment server, right-clicking it, and then pressing Mount. So it's now mounted as the E drive. Then under Operating Systems, I will create a new folder and call this Windows 11, and then next, and next. And then in the Windows 11 folder, we can right-click and import operating system. We'll want to select a full set of source files, and then next. Then in the source directory, press Browse, and then select the E drive, and then pressing OK. If at any point this gives an error when you try and select your drive, it will likely be because if you go to the sources folder and then search for install, you should have an install.wim file. If it gives an error, it's likely that you have an install.esd file on your installation media. What you'll have to do is copy the install.esd file to the desktop and then extract the install.wim file from within it. I will link a video in the description below on how to actually do that. But if you've got the WIM file, it will just let you import that straight away. So I've selected the directory and then press next. It will ask you what you want to call it. I'm just going to leave it all as default and then keep pressing next. And now that's importing. Now that that's finished importing, we can press finish and we can see that our Windows 11 version is now appearing. I'm also going to install an application. So to do that, we can right click the applications and do new folder. And I'm just going to give it the folder name, the name of the application, and press next and then finish. And then within the folder, right click and do new application. Application with source files. Do next. Give the application a name. You can fill the rest of this in. I'm just going to leave it blank for this demo. And then next. Here we select the source directory for the folder which has the application in. So mine is under downloads and then 7-zip. And then we'll do next. Leave this as default. You can give it a name if you want. I'll just leave it as default. And then for the command line, we want the silent install command, which will likely be used using msexec. So this is what I'm going to use, and then press next, and then next again to import the application. We can see that it's imported successfully, and then press finish, and we can see our application in the applications list. Now what we need to do is create a task sequence to actually deploy the operating system. So we can do that by going to task sequences, right click, and then new task sequence. We can give it an ID. I'm just going to call this Win11, task sequence name, Windows 11 Enterprise Evaluation, and then next. Leave it as standard client task sequence, and then next. And then here we just want to select our operating system, and then next. If you've got a product key, you can specify it here. I'm just going to do not specify it this time. Here we can give it the username, so I'll just call this administrator, organization, give it your organization name. And if you want, for some reason, you can set a home page. And then next. Specify an administrator password for the local administrator account. And then next. And then next to create the task sequence. And here we can do finish. And we can see we've got our task sequence. You can right click and go to properties. And under task sequence, you can see all of the steps. But for this demo, we're just going to leave them all blank as default. So now if we go to our deployment share, we can right click and then go to properties to set some configuration on the deployment share. I'm going to untick x86 as Windows 11 doesn't support that, so we don't need to do anything with it. Under Windows PE, I'm going to select x64, untick generate a light touch bootable ISO file as we don't need that, and it will speed up the deployment share generation time. And I'm going to leave everything else as default. If you've pressed the Windows PE tab and it crashes your Deployment Workbench, it's because you've installed the wrong Windows PE add-on and you've installed the Windows 11 version, which doesn't include the x86, and it will crash it. So you'll need to uninstall that and install the Windows 10 2004 version. But if you followed this guide, you shouldn't have any issues. And then I'm going to go to monitoring and then enable monitoring for this deployment share and then apply and OK. Oh, before I press OK, I'm just going to leave the rules as default temporarily, the same with the bootstrap, and I will show you how to modify them in a few minutes. So I'm just going to press OK. And then if we right click our deployment share again, we can do update deployment share. Completely regenerate the boot images, as is the first time. So what this will do is under our C drive, and then deployment share, and then boot, it will create us a WIM file, which we can then import into Windows Deployment Services to then boot off and then initiate the deployments. So if I do next and then next, it will start to generate that, and we'll see this folder start being populated. So I'm just going to wait for this to finish. Now that the deployment share has been generated, we can press finish, and then we should see we've now got a light touch PE WIM file in our C deployment share boot folder. Now this is the WIM file that we're going to import into Windows Deployment Services for the computers to boot from. So if I go back to our Windows Deployment Services, we can go into boot images and then right click and add boot image. Select browse, browse to C, deployment share boot, and select our light touch PE, and then press open, and then just next, next, next through the wizard to add the boot image into Windows Deployment Services. Now that's been added, we can press finish, and the next thing we need to do is actually boot a PC across the network. So if we boot a PC, it should ask us to select a network location. See if it does. There we go, it's picked up, so we can just press enter and then boot into the network. If you're using a PC, you'll probably have to press F12 while it's booting to boot into the network, or go into the boot options and select network boot. Once Microsoft Deployment Toolkit has loaded, you can set any settings here and then press run the deployment wizard. Here it will ask you to authenticate, so I'm just going to log in. And then OK. And then here is where we can do some configuration on what we actually want. So first we select our task sequence that we created before and then press next. Then we can specify a computer name if we want to join it to a work group or join it to a domain. I'm just going to select work group temporarily and then next. If we want to back up any data from existing installs, select any data here, press next. If we want to restore any data, set any time zones. Here we can select any applications. And then if we want to capture an image, we can do that here. And then the next thing we can press ready. But what I'll show you how to do now is if we go back to our Deployment Share or Microsoft Deployment Workbench. If we right click and go to Properties on our deployment share, under Rules, we can specify some rules here so it actually skips a lot of them unneeded steps. So I've just pasted in my default config. So what this does is it skips them welcome screens, and it skips the capture wizard, it skips the asking for a password, the product key, skips the time zone and the locale selection. It automatically selects to join it to a domain, and I've just entered the domain name here. It automatically puts the machine in an OU that I've created, and then it automatically sets the keyboard locale, time zone, and the event service. And then if you edit the bootstrap, so if we just get rid of this and then paste in my default one, what this does, this just skips that initial welcome screen, sets the keyboard, and then automatically authenticates using these details. Ideally, you wouldn't use a domain administrator account, you create a separate one, but for this lab, I'm just using domain administrator. So I'll link both of these config files in the blog post in the description. So anytime you make a change to any of these, what you need to do is apply, OK, and then right click and update the deployment share. You can either optimize the boot images or you can completely regenerate. I generally just always go with the completely regenerate, but you can just optimize it and update, but I just regenerate and then press next. And then next, and this will regenerate us a new lighttouch.wim file with all of them changes we've just made. So I'll just wait for this to finish. Now that that's regenerated, I'm going to press finish, and we've got our new Wim file. So what we need to do now is go back to our Windows Deployment Services, right click the existing Wim file, sorry, the existing boot image, and do replace image. And then we just select that new lighttouch PE, and then just next through the wizard, and this will replace the old image with that new image, and then next, and this is just going to replace it now. The image is successfully replaced, so we can do finish, and if we go back to our network boot machine and then restart it, and the next time we boot from the network, it should have all of those new changes we've just made. So if I press enter to boot from the network, it's picking up our lighttouch PA Wim file. And we can see now it's booted straight in and asking us to select a task sequence. We don't have to authenticate, that's already done because it's baked into the image file. So now we can just select our task sequence, press next. And you'll notice it's only asking for a computer name. It's automatically filled in all of the domain details. So we can just give it a name. We'll just call this Win1122H2. And then next. And it's not asking us any of them other backup and capture steps. It's just asking us to select the applications we want to install. And then press next. We can see any of the details we've selected. And then we can just press begin to start the deployment process. There we go. Operating system deployment completed successfully. So we press finish. If we open up system, we can see that it's given it the name, it's added it to the domain, and if we go to start all apps, we can see that 7-zip has been installed successfully. If we go back to our deployment workbench and we go to monitoring, we can see that the monitoring properties are here, that it's completed. If you look at this while it's actually deploying, you can see what step it's at and how long it's took. That entire deployment took 8 minutes and 11 seconds to deploy the operating system, the application, add it to the domain, and it's ready to go. And that is how you deploy Windows 11 22H2 using Microsoft Deployment Toolkit and Windows Deployment Services.